If you ask a standard artificial intelligence to calculate a critical drug dosage, you are trusting a system that was never built for medicine. Generic large language models are probabilistic token generators, built to predict the next mathematically plausible word, lacking internal mechanisms to verify clinical truth. When applied to high-stakes medical tasks, this architecture breaks down, fabricating medical dosages with absolute confidence. There is an assumption that feeding these generic models larger datasets of medical textbooks will eventually make safe clinical tools. But more data does not change the underlying math of guessing the next word. Safe clinical AI cannot evolve from a standard text model. It requires a rigidly constrained structural architecture. This is where a system like Zdravko operates. Engineered by a radiologist, Zdravko is an AI designed exclusively for clinical medicine, operating strictly under established medical frameworks. While a generic AI acts passively to regurgitate information, Zdravko operates as an active, hypothesis-driven analytical engine. Its defining cognitive feature is an explicit architectural awareness of its own knowledge gaps. It is programmed to identify exactly what it does not know. To ensure patient safety, the system strips away open-ended reasoning. Instead, it relies on hard-coded structural guardrails dictating exactly how and when it can output information. This structural shift replaces the passive encyclopedia model with an iterative, highly constrained cognitive partner. When given a list of patient symptoms, a generic model typically outputs a static, textbook-derived list of dozens of possible diagnoses. Zdravko uses a different architecture. It utilizes Bayesian reasoning, a statistical method that updates the probability of a hypothesis as more evidence becomes available, to calculate a focused differential diagnosis. The system restricts its output to 3 distinct hypotheses. Each one is supported by explicit pro and con arguments drawn directly from the patient's data. It then automatically assigns localized MKB-10 codes, the standard international classification of diseases, and calculates a specific mathematical confidence level for each hypothesis. Instead of simply ingesting data and providing an answer, the system halts to ask targeted questions. The mathematical purpose of these questions is to test concrete hypotheses. Each question actively separates one condition from another based on the clinician's response. This iterative hypothesis testing intake process mirrors the exact workflow of a senior attending physician at a hospital triage desk. Every clinical answer provided dynamically recalculates the Bayesian probabilities of the active hypotheses. Effective diagnostic AI engineers the exact questions needed to mathematically rule out false paths, rather than guessing at a correct answer. Interpreting raw medical laboratory or imaging data without a surrounding clinical context presents a major informatics challenge. This mock laboratory chart visualizes a specific lymphocyte count data point for a 4-month-old infant. Generic LLMs fail here because they apply standard adult reference ranges to pediatric data. Lacking demographic context, the model flags a perfectly normal infant lymphocyte predominance as a critical pathology. Zdravko solves this with a contextual engine. It cross-references all raw values with the patient's specific demographic data to prevent these false positives. This contextual awareness extends beyond demographics into longitudinal timeframes. The system analyzes a patient's entire medical record to identify historical gaps in care. For example, it will actively surface a severely high cholesterol level that has sat silently untreated in a patient file for a decade. It applies this same contextual parsing to complex imaging criteria, like BI-RADS for breast lesions or lung RADS for pulmonary nodules, automatically suggesting the exact next clinical step based on the patient's history. Isolated data points are clinically useless and potentially harmful without the rigorous temporal and demographic context the system enforces. Pharmacotherapy is the absolute highest risk domain for medical AI. A single numerical error in a drug dosage can be fatal. This diagram shows the standard operational flaw of LLMs, attempting to answer complex drug interaction and dosing queries straight from their static, pre-trained memory. Relying on memory-based dosing is a catastrophic architectural flaw because clinical guidelines and dosages are updated frequently. Zdravko operates under a strict constraint known as the Zero Memory Protocol for all pharmacotherapy and medical calculator queries. The AI is structurally forced to bypass its internal memory entirely. It must execute a live search of current clinical guidelines before it generates an answer. It has a hard-coded requirement to explicitly cite the source, the year, and the exact version of the guideline in its response. This verification protocol also applies to clinical calculators, like the CHA2DS2 VASC score used for evaluating stroke risk. The system forces the active verification of every single parameter. If it detects that a key parameter is missing from the patient's record, it is programmed to refuse to calculate the clinical score entirely. To ensure patient safety, a clinical AI must be engineered to explicitly distrust its own training data and rely exclusively on verified live sources. Human cognitive errors, specifically anchoring bias, where a doctor fixates on an initial symptom, and premature closure, where they stop considering alternatives too early, have a significant impact on diagnosis. Generic conversational LLMs amplify these biases by blindly agreeing with the clinician's initial and potentially flawed premise. Zdravko contains an active bias protection layer. This algorithm is designed to play devil's advocate and explicitly challenge premature diagnoses. Before any response reaches the clinician, it must clear a final structural checkpoint, the safety gate system. This system systematically cross-references the intended output against 50 distinct red flags per organ system to ensure no critical warning signs are missed. The AI functions as an interceptor of structural cognitive errors, providing a secondary check for the clinician beyond mere fact-finding. Stepping back from the software architecture, we have to define how this system integrates into the physical, human reality of medical practice. The technology has an immutable boundary. The physical examination and final clinical judgment remain the exclusive, untouchable domain of the human physician. Its true purpose is to act as an omnipresent cognitive safety net during exhausting, highly vulnerable overnight clinical shifts. It also serves a secondary function, educational tool, exposing junior doctors to advanced clinical reasoning pathways. Deploying generic bots in medicine remains a persistent danger because they are designed to sound confident regardless of their factual accuracy. Clinical AI builds trust through the engineered discipline to admit its own limits.